And we're starting. Yes?
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to ULT San Diego, here for the Aquarian series. And the title of the presentation this afternoon is Collective Karma, given to us by Dr. Judy Salzman. So before we get started, a reading. This is from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4. Krishna, both I and thou have passed through many births, O harasser of thy foes. Mine are known unto me, but thou knowest not of thine. Even though myself unborn of changeless essence and the Lord of all existence, yet in presiding over nature, which is mine, I am born but through my own Maya, the mystic power of self-ideation, the eternal thought in the eternal mind. I produce myself among creatures, O son of Bharata, whenever there is a decline in virtue and an insurrection of vice and injustice in the world. And thus I incarnate from age to age for the preservation of the just, the destruction of the wicked, and the establishment of righteousness. Whoever, O Arjuna, knoweth my divine birth and actions to be even so, doth not upon quitting his mortal frame enter into another, for he entereth into me. Many who were free from craving, fear, anger, filled with my spirit, and who depended upon me, having been purified by the ascetic fire of knowledge, have entered into my being. In whatever way men approach me, in that way do I assist them. But whatever the path taken by mankind, that path is mine, O son of Pritha. Those who wish for success to their works in this life sacrifice to the gods. And in this world, success from their actions soon cometh to pass.
Okay, let's talk about collective karma, which I admit I do not understand perfectly, and I'm sure none of you do either. So let's share what we have and learn from each other. Okay. And I think to talk about, we need to go back to the very beginning of the universe and the secret doctrine. The second fundamental of the secret doctrine has to do with cycles. And of course, karma has everything to do with cycles, because we know karma takes place in cycles. So the secret doctrine says the eternity of the universe in toto as a boundless plane upon which periodically the playground of numberless universes incessantly manifesting and disappearing, called the manifesting stars and sparks of eternity. Of course, this is what the secret doctrine affirms in the second fundamental. And the second assertion of the secret doctrine is the absolute universality of the law of periodicity of flux and reflux, ebb and flow, which physical science has observed and recorded in all departments of nature. And of course, then we can connect this to Judge's aphorisms on karma, that there is no karma unless there is a being to make or feel its effects. Well, of course, in the beginning of the universe, we were in an arupa state. And of course, now on globe D, in the fifth race of the fourth round, we're in a rupa form state. So we are beings upon whom karma is operating very strongly. But even in the arupa state, there was a karma that again brought on this universe. the son of a necessity. So let's look at the aphorisms on karma. First of all, they're very complex because karma is very complex. Well, if we look at a group, it says that race karma influences each unit in the race through the law of distribution, national karma, or concentrated. Family karma governs with a nation where families have been kept pure and distinct, for in any nation where there is a mixture of a family, as obtains in each Kali Yuga period. Of course, that is the dark age in which we're in now. Family karma is distributed over a nation, but even at such periods, some families remain coherent for long periods, and then members feel the sway of family karma. The word, quote, family may include several smaller families. Well, I find this very complicated because, on the one level, we're all members of small nuclear families, but we also know that we're mixed with other families. And in a Kali Yuga period, apparently, there's more mixing that goes on. But we know that some families greatly influence nature and nations themselves, not only like the royal family of Britain, but families such as the Medici in Italy, the Borgias, who had popes in their family, uh, the Kennedys in the United States, whose karma seems to be waiting, and so on. So we can discuss this later. But I think each of us know that sometimes in a small nuclear family, there are repetitions of karma. Like, for example, my I hope you can all hear me. Can you?
Yes.
Yes, we can
Yeah,
hear
my
you.
mother had an accident in which she broke her hip in the kitchen, and then later she had an auto accident. Well, I had these same accidents only in reverse order. I had an auto accident which was life changing, and then I had a hip broken in the kitchen. Although fortunately for me, I do not have Alzheimer's, as did my poor mother. So it was a different sort of karma. But family karma can affect a whole nation, as we know, and race of people. And a race in the secret doctrine doesn't necessarily mean one's color. It has to do with the rays, of which there are 7 distinct rays. So two people who look very different may be part of the same ray, and two people of the same race may be of different race. So it's very complicated. Okay. Now, also, we have to deal with the subject of cataclysms. And of course, Judge says in aphorism 30 here that karma operates to produce cataclysms of nature through the mental and astral planes of being. A cataclysm may be traced to an immediate physical cause, such as an internal fire, an atmospheric disturbance, but these have been brought on by the disturbance created by a dynamic power of human thought. Well, of course, we know from a lot of scientific research today that human industry, auto emissions, etc., human carelessness, such as cutting too many trees, has affected the planet. And many people are worried about cataclysms such as the Doomsday Glacier down in Antarctica, which said if it melts, is going to raise the sea levels and possibly take out lower areas such as the Netherlands, Manhattan, New Orleans, many important areas of the world. And of course, this would be quite tragic and disastrous, but it may happen. I remember in 1980, we had a cataclysm at the Oregon Washington border where Mount St. Helens, that volcano, blew. And I remember seeing that volcano when I was 19. And when I saw it again, it was half its size because it was an extreme disaster for that area. Quite a few people were killed, and all the trees around it were flattened. And we know that 7,500 years ago, Mount Mazama in Oregon was a volcano, and that created Crater Lake. And Mount Shasta up in Northern California is still an active volcano. It hasn't erupted in 2,000 years, but if it does, it's going to make some big changes. Probably none of us are going to have to worry much anymore. Okay, so cataclysms is another idea to consider in collective karma. And also, Judge talks about warnings that those egos who have no karmic connection with the globe where a cataclysm is coming are kept without the latter's operation in two ways. A, by repulsion acting on their inner nature, and B, by being called and warned by those who watch the progress of the world. Well, of course, an example of this is Noah in the flood in Genesis. And according to some scholars of the Bible, Noah is a generic name for those who realize that the continent of Atlantis is going down, and there would going to be what appears to be at least a universal flood. And virtually every religion of the world, which I have read about, has a flood myth. In Greek mythology, Deucalions, where these two gods constantly knock on the door and they find two people who are willing to help the poor, and they are saved from a coming flood. But there are others who eventually go down with the flood because they're, of course, involved with it in ways they do not know. Okay, now, if we want to look at the larger cycles, we know in the Sacred Doctrine there was once a continent of Lemuria, which formed a kind of a horseshoe coming up through what is now Australia, a remnant, all the way up to Southern California. And it went through its cycles and went down according to karmic law. And the next continent, though, Atlantis, according to Judge, was in the fourth subrace, was in Kali Yuga when destroyed. Now, these are the Atlanteans, the fourth root race, and the fourth subrace was about as low as you could go into the field of matter. And as I understand it, it's meant that the Atlanteans, the fourth root race, were in the lowest part of their cycle when they destroyed themselves by lasering each other's cities. They never made it to a higher level of consciousness in the fifth to seventh subraces. So the Atlanteans, according to the Secret Doctrine, and its two workers, such as Bull Linton, understood something they called Vril, which had to do with being able to harness an energy that is unknown to us at this point, where the sidereal energy of the Earth's axis is actually harnessed, and this would give us unlimited energy for free, but it would also give us unlimited power. And so it's not revealed how one should do that in the Secret Doctrine because we're not ready for it. Okay, now, Um, Considering cycles, we know that the Egyptians and the ancient Maya uh, are really heirs to the cyclic law of Atlantis. And the Egyptian monuments, Papri and other record the cycles as spoken of. They held, and the ancient Chinese held, that a great cycle governs the earth called the sidereal cycle because it is related to the stars. The work was so large that it had to be measured by the stars, and that cycle is 25,800 years long. Well, the secret doctrine says this is about the duration of a family race. Now, a family race would be like, for example, the Japanese, or some religions are associated with a family race. The Jews are, for example, a family race, and they're going to last about that number of years. And of course, as mentioned before, the first acts through their occult use of technology, meaning that a secret we don't yet fully understand, that H.P. Blavatsky discusses in The Secret Doctrine with the Keeley machine, which also involves the use of the owner of the machine, although she doesn't fully reveal how it's done at all, but she does discuss it. Well, Atlantis went down about 8,500 years ago, according to the secret doctrine. Their last island went down about 11,000 years ago, according to the Egyptian priest Solon in Plato's Timaeus. We and the Americans, including the Europeans, bear the collective karma of Atlantis. Now, this is one of the reasons that we're suffering so much and have so many wars. And a very interesting discussion of war and its effects is in a part of H.P. Blavatsky's collective works called Karmic Visions. And I want to talk about this because it's a very beautifully written piece. The prose is lovely. And in the beginning part of it, there is a Frankish king named Clovis, who's a barbarian, and a Sibyl, who is a prophetess, says to him, "The gods say, Clovis, thou art a curse. Clovis, thou shalt be reborn among thy present enemies, and suffer the tortures thou hast afflicted upon thy victims. All the combined power and glory thou hast deprived them of shall be thine in prospect, yet thou shalt never reach it." And of course, she never really finishes her sentence because Clovis kills the Sibyl at this point, according to H.P. Blavatsky. And of course, what happens to Clovis is that he, being a Frankish king, is born among the Germans and does suffer constantly during his rebirths because he really inwardly, as a soul ego, doesn't want to be this way. Well, again, William Q. Judge, even in The Ocean of Theosophy, which is a very basic work, says in these cycles we can include mixed characters who've had great influence on the nations, such as King Arthur, who may have been a Roman captain, Pharaoh Moses, Charlemagne, reincarnated as Napoleon Bonaparte, Clovis of France, reborn as Emperor Frederick III of Germany, and Washington, the first president of the United States of America, where the root for the new race is being formed. So we're still heirs to the karma of Europe and Atlantis and its mistakes. Okay, now if you read Karmic Visions, what happens is that after lifetimes of being a bloody butcher, the soul ego of who this person really is has a dream. Never, oh, never shall I henceforth sacrifice for vainglorious fame or ambition a single son of my motherland. Our world is so full of unavoidable misery, so poor with joys and bliss. And shall I add to its cup of bitterness the fathomless ocean of woe and blood called war? Avaunt such thought, oh, nevermore. But of course, this poor soul ego is so disconnected from its lower self that he awakens on a troop trade where he's Frederick III of Germany, who took over France. And of course, this was the conquest which Emile Zola wrote about, the French author, called The Downfall. And of course, we know for years, England, France, and Germany were in constant war with each other. Spain was at war with other parts of Europe and the Netherlands. And of course, you could go on and on about the wars between Catholics and Protestants in Europe. And now, of course, we have wars between Muslims and Jews going on in Gaza. And it would appear to me, as a religion scholar, that the more religions are alike, I mean, in many ways, Islam and Judaism are very much alike. They recognize the same prophets. They seem to be in to more conflict than those that are quite different. But of course, there are territorial and economic reasons involved. Okay, let's go on to the next. Well, now let's talk about the United States of America, that political entity. And of course, and my understanding of the judge's article, Adepts in America, in 1776, the men who drafted the Declaration of Independence were not adepts in the sense that their principles were perfectly aligned and they were beyond human passions, but they were not selfish. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Franklin were Freemasons, ready to pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And of course, the man who wrote The Age of Reason, Thomas Paine, was a messenger of the adepts who wanted a new nation based on the sovereignty of the people and the rule of law. Hopefully, it would be a bastion of universal brotherhood. And of course, we know that in the Declaration of Independence, there is not any mention of a transcendental Christian God. There is nature and nature's God. And in the Constitution of the United States, of course, which we all know from fifth grade civics, if we were brought up in this country, it really, in the preamble, says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and to ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America." Well, in spite of this, I remember some years ago at Cal Poly, it took me 3 Socratic questions to get a college class. I said, "Where does sovereignty rest in the United States?" And someone said, "With the president." No, with the Congress. And finally, someone said, "With the people." The Congress represents the people, and the Supreme Court is supposed to interpret the Constitution, not change it. And of course, we know that we have not yet achieved universal brotherhood. Now, one more slide back for Thomas Paine did write the following to show that he was a very intuitive individual, and in the age of reason and that and common sense were actually read from street corners in Philadelphia and New York and other places where people gathered because 95% of the population was illiterate at the time. Paine says, I saw, or at least I thought I saw, a vast scene opening itself to the world in the affairs of America, and it appeared to me that unless the Americans changed the plan they were pursuing and declared themselves independent, they would not only involve themselves in a multiplicity of new difficulties, but shut out the prospects that was then offering itself to mankind through their means. There are two distinct classes of thoughts, those produced by reflection and those that bolt into the mind of their own accord. I've always made it a rule to treat those voluntary visitors with civility, and it is from them I have acquired all the knowledge that I have. This is from the Age of Reason. Now, this is an extraordinary statement by a man who really was born in Scotland and never really did make very much money. He lived very poorly, and he also influenced the French Revolution, which, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte betrayed tragically because Napoleon understood a great deal. He at one point said, J'aime Charlemagne on the battlefield. He understood reincarnation and was very interested in the pyramids of Egypt. Because of that, and of course, he turned megalomaniac and betrayed the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Well, finally, let's look at the Great Seal of the United States. Now, this comes directly out of Masonry. Annuit Coeptus, the heavens decree Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new order of the world. Well, of course, this new order of the world is a pyramid which is separated from what we would call the eye of Dhamma. In Buddhism, of course, that is the all-seeing eye, which tries to look and see who needs help. And that is what this nation was originally all about, really, helping, taking in immigrants, growing as new people came in, new stock, and eventually, hopefully, achieving universal brotherhood. Although we know at the moment we are far from achieving that, and we do not seem to have a government at the moment that is implementing these ideals. So I think we need to talk about our collective karma in the United States and in the Americas in general, including Canada, Mexico, Central and South America, because they're also continents that are heir to the Atlantean debacle. And of course, the Russians, the Europeans, are also Atlantean egos. And we also know that the word Aryan has nothing to do originally with the white race, but it has to do with the newer race that developed after Atlantis and does include the white people, but it really means the noble ones, according to some Sanskrit scholars who follow the path of virtue. And of course, it has been badly desecrated by people who are racist, and so has the symbol of the swastika. Well, this symbol, of course, comes from Masonry, and Washington was a very devoted Mason. And when I think about it, you'd wonder if someone like Clovis may have once been Washington, but through the lifetimes he improved to be the man he became. is that we were not perfect men. Jefferson had 6 children by one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, but he was unable to marry her and unable to agree with Adams that the South should get rid of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, because he said that the South could not be economically strong without it at the moment, and that losing the South meant we couldn't win the Revolutionary War. So even from the beginning, we were very imperfect with imperfect men, and Benjamin Franklin, who was a much loved member of the Continental Congress and later the first Postmaster General, he used to make jokes, and he said, well, we better hang together or we'll all hang separately. So, in spite of the fact these were not perfect men, they were influenced by a very higher order of ideals, which have not in any way come to fruition. So, I thought we might talk about how we could possibly improve the situation of a karma of which so many of us are the heir, and talk a bit together about it. Well, thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking with you.
Just look up there.
Hello?
Hello.
I haven't heard anybody.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Judy. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Thank you very much for your all-inclusive talk. You covered all the bases, and you brought up a lot of things that you wanted to discuss. So, want to take a question from you, Luca? Do you have a question from one of the things that Judy brought up?
Yes. Oh, hi, Judy. Happy holidays, everybody. I think it was wonderful what you did, and very timing. And yes, I was reading that how the Constitution was done, but also the Masons. You mentioned the fact that a lot of them were Masons, and they constructed in different part of, especially in Washington, they have this monument that is pointed to the, almost like the pyramids, pointing to the specific pointing in the sky. The, what did you call it, that erected by the what is called that building?
Obelisk?
The obelisk, yeah. And that's supposed to be done by Mason, and they find out the different part of the country, they have the signature of the Mason, you know, with their symbol that they use. And it is very interesting that that they were so in tune with the brotherhood of humanity and the mission of the future. You know, we're still working on it, I guess. But thank you so much. It was, like I say, wonderful.
Well, they were very included. As I tried to emphasize, these were not perfect beings that signed the Declaration of Independence, but they were unselfish because they could have all been hanged. And it didn't look for several years like we were going to win the Revolutionary War. If you read the history of Washington, I mean, he positively wept when he saw the condition of his men in Valley Forge. But they had to hold that army together because there had to be an army to fight the British in the spring. And of course, the Americans didn't even have any uniforms. And so many of them took the uniforms off of dead British soldiers. And to show they were American, they used to put feathers in their caps. And that's where the song Yankee Doodle comes from, which is originally to ridicule us. But then, of course, it became our song, for fun. And the British, Cornwallis, had no idea that we were going to lose, that they were going to lose to this ragtag army put together by a former British officer and held together by a Continental Congress that really didn't have any money. And of course, people in Philadelphia and New York were celebrating that they didn't have to pay taxes to the British anymore. And yet we did win the Revolutionary War. But this didn't really end the revolution because there had to be a constitution, which eventually did come about. But of course, it has hardly been perfect. And of course, now we're in a situation where many people have said that those brave men die at Valley Forge for what we have now. We have not been nice to immigrants. We are in a situation in which our economy could be faltering, although wealthier people are doing well. And we are not in a situation where the world is looking well upon us. So there's a lot to be discussed here. So I'm sure there are other questions or comments. Thank you.
You take a question from Jairo?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Judy. Mm, uh, so, in the beginning slide, there was talk of race. How does the Theosophist think of race? And what is this law of distribution? And then collective karma. When does it go from individual karma to collective karma? So there must be lots of overlapping. Like when you get on an airplane, you have a collective karma with all the passengers there, and then it ends when you get off the plane. What do you think about that? Thank you.
Well, this is a very difficult topic that you raise because we all have an individual karma to be a member of a nuclear family, to be a member of a community, our neighborhood, our city, our county, our state, our nation. And there may be temporary karmas like being on a plane with a group of people. Of course, if that plane goes down, there's something more dramatic about it, we could think. But sometimes, as it's mentioned by Judge, there might be someone caught in a karma of like war or cataclysm who's really innocent of that war. Eventually, they will be compensated for it in some way. But to fully understand this is very difficult. I mean, it is a study of a depth, just as the Bhagavad Gita is, because we know that karma means action, and there's all sorts of actions going on in so many different ways that it's very difficult to understand. But what I understand, especially in reading karmic visions, which I've done several times, is that even one person can affect a whole nation. I mean, Clovis of France didn't realize that he, as the Sybil curses him, and it's not because of what she says, she understands karma, because he's going to be born among the Germans, who are his enemies, and there's going to be this constant war and violence going on. And he, as a soul ego, would like to end this, but he is not connected enough to his higher self to do it. But there may have been some who in the past were very violent people who eventually did grow as soul egos and become someone like Washington, who, again, not a perfect person, and certainly Benjamin Franklin. I mean, he would laugh a lot about his own imperfections. He was really quite funny. At one point, Franklin wrote about writing to a young friend of his. And Franklin said, well, when looking for a mistress, choose an older woman because they're so appreciative and there's far less chance of pregnancy. So again, Franklin was not a man who was a perfect adept, but he was very much a genius and very much willing to listen to higher ideas and ideals. And of course, he had a very profound influence. But he was not emotions. And so, at any rate, I haven't fully been able to understand the relationship of individual to collective karma, but I think it's something we all need to meditate upon because some individuals, if they change, would have an enormously positive effect on the world. And I think we know who some of them are, who are current political leaders who really should be simple learners, but instead they want to be on top. And that has been the terrible tragedy of Atlantis. So who gets to be number one? It's ruined American football, which I used to enjoy enormously, college football. It's now been ruined by money. And, well, there are many other issues, and I think David Grossman has a question or comment.
Go ahead, David.
Okay. Well, thanks, Judy, for your metaphysical historical overview this evening. Really, you were just kind of touching a little bit on the question I was thinking of at the end here. What can you say about the idea of group karma or collective karma in relation to the saying that's directed at, I guess, each of us, come ye out and be ye separate?
Okay, so the question is, what can I say about the relation of collective karma coming out and be separate? Well, that certainly is a saying in Christianity, which is of vital importance because you don't want to just think along with the masses. I mean, if all you do all day long is watch television, pretty soon your brain is going to be pretty mashed up in a massive state. And so being separate means you're going to have to think for yourself individually. You might think about why you are in a situation. I think all of us, I remember being a teenager about 14 and looking in the mirror and thinking about how did I get to be a person and to be a part of a family. My parents were totally different people than I am. In fact, I had to endure a great deal of abuse from people in my family who said that studying philosophy and religion and things like that were just worthless and that I would never have any money or get anywhere. Well, I really didn't plan on it, but I have 10 times what they had in terms of owning property and being fortunate in that way, but I've also had the wonder of being able to learn the great ideas of theosophy and be educated because the state of California provided it for me. So I think we all, if we are able to think for ourselves, and I think Thomas Paine is talking about that, where he realizes, he sees a kind of vision for the Americans that they couldn't keep going on just pleading with George III, who was the Elector of Hanover and really spoke German most of the time. He was not an Englishman, but they had to have royalty then to be the head of a state. So he was imported to be King of England. He was very unpopular. And of course, he did not listen to the colonials, and the colonials couldn't take it anymore, so that the revolution had to occur. But I mean, for a long time, even Benjamin Franklin said, I'm too British to be American. And then he said, I'm too American to be British. And so he was willing to think individually. And Thomas Paine and so were these others, they weren't going along with the crowd. And I think that is the problem, that so many people get to be part of a collective karma because they simply follow the crowd or whatever is popular in the day. And so being able to be an independent thinker, as Emerson says, self-reliant, is very important. Because if you just simply conform, then you're never really going to be able to think for yourself.
Right.
Judy, could you unshare the slideshow?
I'd share the slideshow.
Yeah, just hit stop share, it's red.
Okay, stop, share, okay.
Thanks. There you go.
It didn't seem to totally disappear. I stopped shared.
Yeah, we can see you really well now. So, I wanted to, could I ask you a question?
Okay, did the slideshow disappear?
It did, that was successful.
Okay.
What's going on with Cain and Abel? You mentioned in your presentation about where there's a lot of commonality in groups. That seems to be where the fighting can be the most vicious. And you cited the overlap between Islam and Judaism, and you have the personal God idea, and you have also, like you say, worshiping the same beings, the same kind of theogony and so forth. But that you could also say other things like I'm thinking of India and Pakistan, where you've got an inherent brotherhood, really. The fact in nature is the brotherhood, but then you have the Cain and Abel problem. And there's other examples, maybe North and South Sudan, maybe, I don't know enough about that. Or, that's right, you already cited the Protestants and the Catholics. So why is it that the most similar at heart, where they really are brothers, is the most vicious, as was Cain and Abel?
Well, I have thought about this, and I don't know if I have a full answer, but it seems that there's something to disagree about. For example, when I tried to talk about the Surah 36 in the Quran, which talks about the prophet Jesus, Isha, I remember so many Christians in the class just jumping up and, oh no, Jesus was the Son of God. He wasn't just a prophet. And I said, wait a minute, doesn't he refer to himself as a prophet in the Gospels when he's up in Galilee? And of course, when he rides a donkey down in Jerusalem, that is how a prophet is treated. But at any rate, there's something to disagree about here. But I mean, many of the Muslims I knew didn't know what to do with like Buddhism because it was so different. It doesn't mean that they agree. And of course, in Afghanistan, those great statues of historical Buddhas, or they may have been, theosophically speaking, emblems of our giant ancestors, they were howitzered. Because I remember a Muslim saying to me, well, people might actually start worshiping those again. And I said, is that going to hurt anything? I said, they probably could have brought in a lot of tourists. And he said, well, you got to be careful what you make money out of. But it seems that many people who get into arguments have something in common to disagree about, you know, like whether Isha is a prophet or the son of God, according to your viewpoint. And of course, in the Quran, there are 25 prophets that are Hebrew prophets. But I can remember a student of mine from Iran was saying, well, David was a prophet and he wasn't really an adulterer, as the Bible says. Well, I mean, how important is this to have a fight about? I mean, there were actually arguments between Catholics and Protestants over what is called the Filioque clause. I mean, whether the Catholics believe that the Holy Spirit comes from the Father and from the Son, and the Orthodox said it comes just from the Father. Well, this is a question that tends not to edification, but let's have a fight about it. I mean, really, I found that to be so much the case in religious studies scholarship that so many people who really should be brothers, and I know there are many, I met some wonderful scholars of Islam in the American Academy of Religion, one of whom passed away recently, and he was a very great help to one of his students who was a young man who admitted him to be quite anti-Islam. And the Muslim scholar said, go home and read your Bible, and you'll find so many correlations between your Bible and the Quran and what is being taught there. And this man eventually became a scholar of Islam himself. And I found when I attended a conference in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University on Persian Sufism, that most of it was about the idea of love in Sufism. And there were 18 Sufis from Iran who played music for 2 hours. And they said the purpose was to invoke the presence of Allah. And there were hundreds of academic, skeptical types who, after that performance, everybody left and no one said a word. It was the most remarkable feeling of unity I ever had. And so once you begin to try to understand the views of another, you could really learn. But unfortunately, so many people reject these views because there's some issue that they find they have in common that they disagree about.
Makes sense. Thank you. Anybody have any other questions? Mr. Kirkerdine.
I see Kirk was there.
Yes, thank you, Judy, for a really fine talk and your comments just now. I think that was it's very pertinent and relevant to us all. I was just reminded that is this remarkable passage in the second book of the SD and I'm sorry I don't have page numbers to refer to right now, but where she is describing the transition between the third root race and the fourth root race, and the things that occurred in the transition from what was a wholly natural and universal religion shared by all, and natural recognition of teachers and devotion to the one life, and a just kind of this a universal sense of the underlying unity behind all things and all the kingdoms of nature that pervaded the third root race. And then there was all, over epochs, there was this progressive captivity and identification with the vestures of incarnation rather than that unitary light from which we've all descended. And the more that progressed and deepened, it deepened, of course, our sense of separateness and a worship of the form rather than the essence. And she says that it was this very transition which gave rise to all the dogmatic religions that we see around us today, and anthropomorphic religions, and this captivity to, the formulation of truths rather than their essential underlying nature. And so that even like you were mentioning, these, which would from a distance would seem like very small distinctions being made between Catholics and Protestants and so on, almost trivial, but because of this kind of captivity to the dogma itself, to the letter of the word instead of the underlying essence of it, it creates this conflict between persons, between traditions, between nations, and so on. At least that's one element I think that seems like it's worth thinking about. So that our really goes back to our individual sense of being a separate human being and the captivity to self-interest and to lower astral and physical identification with the embodiment rather than our inner essence. Just some thoughts.
Yes, well, that's a very important comment. I know volume 2, page 272 of the Secret Doctrine talks about the beginning of the human race where every person knew themselves to be a man god. And this, of course, included women as well. Originally, of course, there was androgyny or hermaphroditism, male and female. He created he them, and then there was this split 18 million years ago. But there was the third eye was still active, and so there was really one universal idea. But of course, in the third race, there were tragic occurrences. That's what is called the sin of the mindless, the copulation of human beings with bestial individuals, and this created the entrapment of the great apes, which I think someone like the late Jane Goodall understood. She went to the Theosophical Society and she appeared at the World Parliament of Religions, and I had a strong sense that she understood this and became a great scholar. But I mean, tragically, we gradually degenerated so the third eye acted no longer. And there were theologians like John Calvin who make God into a kind of fiend, that he creates certain beings who are going to be sinful and then they're going to suffer forever and ever for finite mistakes. And then there are others, of course, who think differently. And having taught religion for some years, I found that just about every student I had a different view about what they thought this God was, and some of them were quite willing to tell you exactly what they thought this God thought. And of course, it was clearly a fabrication. And hopefully, we can grow out of this to come together. And there are ecumenical movements, at least, where people are trying to talk to each other and learn from each other.
There is, I'd like to take, Jeff Clark's question. Could you, do the favor of asking your question in an economical way? And then, because we're almost out of time, and I had another question after yours, so go ahead, Jeff.
I know this is kind of a difficult point, but in Buddhism, karma is considered to be a voluntary act. It's murder, not manslaughter, so to speak. So how, in other words, how could there be collective karma if karma involves acts of volition? I mean,
Oh.
people don't make the same act of volition all at the same time.
No, but there could be a karma from the past. Like if you read Karmic Visions by H.P. Blavatsky,
Yeah.
there's a sense that poor man, whom she begins as Clovis, is so ignorant and violent that, of course, he not only kills the prophetess, but he continues to be quite murderous as a Frankish king, and then he's reborn among the Germans, his enemies, and he continues to be a violent, bloody butcher and a kind of a berserker. And eventually, his soul grows to the extent that he doesn't want this anymore, but he can't connect enough to the soul ego to get out of this cycle. And we know that even a few people in this world who are currently on top and leaders of nations, if they would change drastically, that there could be a tremendous transformation in the world. But it doesn't look like they're going to change. They want to be number one. Having been in Russia, I had a sense that the Russian people were very much like us. They wanted a good life. They wanted to be on top of things economically. Although we were much better off than they were in 1993 when I visited there, and things were fairly friendly. We had Gorbachev at the World Congress of Philosophy, for example, and he knew a lot about philosophy. I was quite impressed. His wife, Raisa Maximova, was a philosophy pro. Well, of course, now we have a leader in Russia and a leader in the United States who are hardly men who are going to give up any kind of territorial advantage or position. They have the tendencies that we see in the past of Napoleon and Kaiser Wilhelm and Kaiser Frederick and the Tsars. And if only there would be a change.
We're out of time, so Jeff, please don't.
Okay. Yeah.
We'll follow through with that, please. Yeah, we're out of time. I do want, this is our last meeting of the entire year. And next year it'll be on the Flute of Krishna. I would like to end on a really positive note. And I have a question that might help with that. Speaking of Russia, there was a given Russian person who wrote The Secret Doctrine. And she says, the very beginning, the way she dedicates the book, she says, this work I dedicate to all true theosophists in every country and of every race. For they called it forth, and for them it was recorded. I was wondering if you could comment on that, Judy.
Yes, well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I've learned a lot from you by doing it. And of course, HPB was a Russian American and the first Russian American citizen. So there's always hope. And the karma is what we make ourselves, individually and collectively. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. Very much. And thank you all for coming. Thanks for your really helpful questions. And next week, it'll be the very mysterious and enigmatic theme of the Flute of Krishna. And that will actually be the keynote for the year. So we'll see what our speaker can do with that. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you and happy Kumeres Day next Sunday.
Yes.
Yes.
Happy.
Kumaras.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
You do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judy.
Namaste, everybody.
Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
Judy. Arigato.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Oh, Marigato. Okay, good night.
Hi.
Good night
Thank
to
you
you.
so much.
Namaste.
Great presentation. Thank you.